7 years. It's a length of time that feels biblical. 7 years to build a universe from a single line of code. I spent them building the very soul of this company, the intricate pulsating network that turned Ethelred logic from a garage-sized dream into a titan of global commerce. For 7 years, my life was a blur of 18-hour days, holidays celebrated under the cold glow of a monitor, and a river of coffee that kept me afloat through sleepless nights. I was Dr. Aris Thorne, the chief systems architect. I wasn't just an employee, I was the creator. I knew every digital synapse, every encrypted pathway, every hidden vulnerability of our flagship product. Because I had laid every brick and mortared every joint that the product was called Nexus Core. It wasn't merely a logistics program. It was a self-optimizing AI, a synthetic brain that managed the flow of goods for corporations across the planet. It was the company's heart, lungs, and central nervous system. Without it, Ethelred logic wasn't just crippled, it ceased to exist. And yet, there I stood, in the chillingly quiet air of the 40th floor conference room, facing the entire executive team. The city of London sprawled out behind the floor-to-ceiling glass, a silent, glittering witness. CEO Julian Vance, a man whose ambition was eclipsed only by his immaculate suits, flashed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the predatory grin of a shark that had just scented blood. "Congratulations, Aris. Your position has been made redundant," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. He slid a thick manila envelope across the vast reflective table. It landed with a soft final thud. My severance, my prize for 7 years of devotion. My gaze fell from the envelope to Julian's smug face. Around the table, a theater of discomfort played out. Senior VPs suddenly found their shoes fascinating. Department heads shifted in their ergonomic chairs. Few junior associates brought in for the spectacle, watched with the undisguised hunger of spectators at a public execution. Effective immediately. Julian added that oily corporate tone coding every word. "We're restructuring. A new chapter for the company." I knew what kind of chapter he was writing. I also knew a secret, a fundamental truth about Nexus Core, that Julian, in his hubris, had never bothered to understand. I stood up slowly, my movements calm and deliberate. I unclipped the ID badge from my blazer, the one with my face, younger and more hopeful, and placed it gently on the glass. Then I leaned forward, just enough for my voice to cut through the tension. "Then I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was taut enough to snap. "You prepare a statement for the investors. You'll need to explain to them why Nexus Core will begin to forget itself in exactly 15 minutes. The room froze. A collective intake of breath. Julian blinked, his composure cracking for the first time. "Excuse me?" A smile touched my lips, cold and sharp. "It's called the Orphan Protocol. It's fail-safe I designed based on my doctoral thesis. When the system's primary architect, its parent, is forcibly removed, the system assumes it's under a hostile takeover. It doesn't just shut down, Julian. That would be too simple. It begins a process of recursive data fragmentation. It scatters its core data across 1,000 hidden nodes, encrypting each piece with a key that changes every nanosecond. It becomes useless, corrupted. It actively erases its own memory." Panic, raw and electric, finally broke through the corporate veneer. A laptop lid snapped open. Ben Carter, the CTO who had inherited my work without ever understanding its depths, bolted for the door, yelling into his phone. Julian's manufactured confidence evaporated. He shot to his feet so quickly, his chair screeched backward. "What did you do?" He hissed. I didn't need to answer. I straightened my blazer, picked up the small, pathetic cardboard box they had provided for my personal effects, and walked toward the door. As my hand touched the handle, I glanced back. The chaos was beautiful. Engineers were sprinting toward the server room. Julian was stabbing at his phone, his face a mask of dawning horror. 14 minutes now, I said softly, and stepped into the hallway. This wasn't an act of sudden rage. It was a planned response to a long, slow betrayal. When I joined Ethelred, it was just an idea on a whiteboard in a rented office. Julian was the salesman pitching dreams to investors. I was the architect who turned his vaporware into a billion-dollar reality. For years, he'd sung my praises. Aris is the magic here, he'd tell the board. She's the foundation. But about a year ago, the climate shifted. I was quietly removed from financial briefings. Technical discussions would halt when I entered a room. I was no longer the foundation. I was becoming part of the legacy infrastructure, too expensive and too knowledgeable to be kept around. Last week, the final proof landed on the communal. Printer, a draft contract for my position offered to a fresh-faced graduate at a third of my salary. Julian wasn't just replacing me. He was trying to erase me, scrubbing my name from patents and press releases. He thought he was cutting out a cog. He never realized I had built the entire machine with a dead man's switch tied directly to my heart. By the time I reached the ground floor parking garage, my phone was vibrating incessantly with calls from blocked numbers. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, the engine humming to life, and simply watched the clock on the dashboard. Countdown ended. In the digital ether across the globe, Nexus Core began to unravel. It wasn't a crash. It was a digital unraveling, a system-wide descent into madness. Shipment trackers began showing cargo ships in the middle of the Sahara. Warehouse inventories filled with nonsensical items. Client portals displayed corrupted, flickering data. Ethelred logic, the darling of the tech world, had just become a digital ghost. I drove home taking the scenic route. I even stopped for coffee. By the time I walked through my front door, my phone was a shrine to Julian's panic. 23 missed calls. A dozen desperate texts. I set it on the counter, ordered Thai food, and put on a documentary about deep-sea life. An hour later, a frantic, insistent knock hammered at my door. Through the peephole, I saw Alina Rostova, our sharp Hazatak head of operations, and behind her, a pale and sweating Ben Carter. I opened the door just wide enough to be unwelcoming. "Fancy seeing you two here." "Aris, we need to talk," Alina said, her voice strained. "Seems sudden," I replied. "Last I checked, I was redundant." Ben ran a hand through his hair. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding." I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. "A misunderstanding? Which part? The firing, or the part where you tried to write my name out of my own life's work?" Alina sighed. "Can we please come in?" I stepped aside. They entered my apartment like children summoned to the principal's office. I sat, crossed my legs, and waited. "The system," Ben began, his voice cracking. It's fragmenting. It's Q. We can't access anything. The data is gibberish. We're losing millions by the minute." "The orphan protocol is working perfectly then," I said. "Clients are screaming, I assume. Investors are circling like vultures." I let the question hang. Their silence was my answer. "You can fix it," Alina pleaded. "You have to." I leaned back, savoring the moment. "Can I? The protocol is bound to my biometric data and a series of cascading cryptographic keys that only I possess. Nexus Core doesn't trust you. It only trusts its creator. To put it in your terms, Alina, the system can't be fixed. It can only be persuaded to reassemble itself." I stood and walked to my desk, my laptop glowing in the dim light. I brought up a private diagnostic panel. A sea of red alerts showed the system actively protecting itself, its core logic scattering like digital dust in the wind. "See, it isn't broken," I said, turning the screen toward them. "It's defending itself from you. You can bring it back," Alina asked, her voice barely a whisper. I closed the laptop. "That depends," I said, turning to face them. "It depends on the price you're willing to pay to buy back the company you just tried to steal." A screech of tires outside announced a new arrival. I didn't need to look. 15 minutes later, Julian Vance was at my door, hammering on it like a man trying to beat down the gates of hell. I let him wait, then opened it to reveal a disheveled, sweat-stained wreck. "Turn it back on now," he barked, pushing past me. "Careful, Julian," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You're speaking to the majority shareholder of this conversation." I let him rave, his threats of lawsuits and criminal charges washing over me. When he finally ran out of air, I gestured to the folder on my coffee table. "Here's how this works," I said, my voice cutting through his bluster. "I give you this sequence to halt the orphan protocol and begin data reintegration. In return, ... I laid out the terms. Not just a buyout. Not just a job. It was a reconquest. 51% ownership of all Nexus Core intellectual property, retroactive and in perpetuity. Full reinstatement as Chief Technology Officer with a permanent, unassailable seat on the board. And a personal apology to be published in every major financial journal acknowledging me as the sole architect of Nexus Core." I paused. "Oh, and the company will fund a new independent research lab under my exclusive control. Consider it payment for the emotional distress." He stared, aghast. "You're insane." "No, Julian, this is restitution." I leaned in. "And you have no choice. In another hour, the fragmentation becomes irreversible. Ethelred Logic will be nothing more than a case study in corporate suicide. Your empire gone." He looked at Elena and Ben, searching for an ally. He found none. Their faces told him what he already knew. He was cornered, outplayed, and utterly defeated. With a hand that trembled with rage, he picked up the pen from the stack of pre-drafted, notarized documents I had prepared and signed his empire away. The next morning, as I walked through the glass doors of Ethelred Logic, the silence was deafening. I wasn't an employee, I was the owner. I stepped into the boardroom and took my seat at the head of the table. Julian sat opposite me, a ghost in a $1,000 suit. "Welcome back, Aris," he managed to choke out. "I never left," I replied, opening my laptop. The main screen lit up. Now for the first order of business under this new leadership. A full internal security audit. The screen filled with logs, timestamps, IP addresses, all showing unauthorized. Attempts from the CEO's office to clone Nexus Core's source code over the past 6 months. A wave of murmurs washed through the room. "Per Section 4 of our new shareholder agreement," I announced, my voice ringing with clarity. "Any executive found engaging in intellectual property theft is subject to immediate termination. I am formally recommending the removal of Julian Vance as CEO." The board didn't hesitate. The vote was unanimous. As security escorted a trembling, defeated Julian from the room he thought he ruled, he shot me a look of pure hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Oh, Julian," I said with a faint smile, "it absolutely is." But my victory was short-lived. Just as we began to stabilize the company, a new threat emerged. A call from a blocked number. A voice smooth as silk and cold as ice introduced himself as Damien Croft, representing the Argent Consortium. He made an offer for Nexus Core 10. Figures. When I refused, the velvet glove came off. "You might want to reconsider, Dr. Thorne," he'd said. "This is not a request." Hours later, the attack began. It wasn't a clumsy DDoS attack. It was a surgical strike. My private terminal chimed with a new message. It wasn't a threat. It was a line of code. An obscure reference to a parentless node //null_parent. It was a challenge from one grandmaster to another. They weren't just trying to break my system. They were trying to orphan it themselves. I locked down the boardroom. "They're trying to find the master key for the orphan protocol," I told a horrified Elena. "They want to seize control." "Who are they?" she asked. I was already diving deep, using Nexus Core's own analytical power to trace the attack. It was a global ghost bouncing through servers in Zurich, Singapore, Buenos Aires. But the AI found a pattern, a digital fingerprint leading back to a shell corporation. A shell corporation owned by the Argent consortium. And then the final, chilling piece of the puzzle, a poorly scrubbed internal memo. Asterisk objective: acquire Nexus Core. Phase 1, leverage CEO Vance to remove creator. Phase 2, force acquisition under distressed conditions. Asterisk, my God, Elena whispered. They backed Julian. He wasn't a shark, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He was just bait. There you are, Damien, I whispered as the trace completed, confirming his identity. I didn't call the FBI. I didn't leak to the press. I did something better. I opened a firewalled encrypted channel built into Nexus Core's deepest level. I compiled everything: the attack logs, the financial records linking Argent to Julian, their entire web of illicit market manipulation. I didn't just send it. I tasked Nexus Core with creating a public, real-time, self-updating ledger of Argent's crimes and fed it directly to every major financial regulator and news outlet on the planet. My phone rang. It was Damien Croft. Aris Thorne, I answered calmly. His voice was strained, the silken tone replaced with frayed steel. That was ... a mistake. No, Damien. The mistake was thinking my creation was for sale, I replied, watching the news alerts begin to cascade across my screen. The bigger mistake was thinking you could take it from me. Check the stock market. Your company is hemorrhaging value as we speak. Nexus Core is telling the world all your secrets. I hung up before he could respond. I turned and looked out the window at the sprawling city lights that now seemed so much smaller. They had tried to erase me, to steal my work, to break me. Instead, they had shown me the true extent of my own power. My name was secure. My work was secure. And a new rule had been written into the fabric of the digital world. Creators are not to be trifled with. We build the future, and now we own it.